Hello everyone, it's Owen. I'm going to be walking you guys through my final project. And for my final project, I wanted to look at wide receivers and compartmentalize or cluster or construct receiver role archetypes that are descriptive of a player's role in their offense and the parts of the field that they work in, and some nuances of production, such as yards per catch, um, yards after the catch per catch, which is a mouthful, and uh, touchdowns, in addition to a couple other predictors that I'll get into. But anyway, let's get into it. Yeah, so the goal is to characterize receivers into roles beyond their position, running back, wide receiver, tight end. So first we're just going to load in our packages here, and we're going to be using play-by-play data from NFL Radar, and we're loading in data from the past three full regular seasons. So 2022, 2023, and 2024 NFL regular seasons. Next, we're going to grab our data, our play-by-play data, and we're going to wrangle it into a format that includes receiver, a unique receiver as the observation, and then some summary stats over this 3-year span, including receptions, targets, catch rate, short route rate, deep route rate, which are supplements of each other, to 100. Receiving yards, yards per catch, yak, which is yards after the catch, and then yak per catch, followed by receiving touchdowns. And the last thing that we do before we sent that big pipe into data is we just pipe to filter, and we are filtering for receptions greater than 100. So we're excluding any skill players who may have caught a pass in this 3-year span, but we were not, um, they didn't exactly have a specific role in their offense if they only caught three passes over that 3-year span. So we want players who are active in their offense and have a fleshed out role um, for their team for the sake of this analysis. And I'm starting to think that I didn't even tell you what my analysis is. So obviously I want to categorize into these groups, and I'm going to be doing so using principal components analysis and K-means clustering. So that is what I'm preparing the data to do here. So after we've got all of those statistics of interest, we are going to start getting ready to compute the principal components. And so we want to exclude a couple stats that I'm not using here. So these were created in order to create other stats. So for example, receptions and targets I used to calculate catch rate, and receiving yards and yak I turned into rate stats, per catch stats, to make the visualization below a little bit easier to see and understand. And so we want to run this here before we start prepping our data. Run this. And then here we are just getting the names, our names column, just storing that and removing it from our data frame or tibble. And then we are computing the principal components. So run that, and that's what we see here. So we have 6 principal components and the respective values for each of our predictors here. And then next, we're going to be able to visualize our principal components on a nice chart here. Make this a little bit easier to see. And what we see here is that our first principal component, dimension 1 down here, is explaining 74.3% of this variance in our group of observations. And so dimension 2 is only explaining 13.5. So there's a major drop off in the explained variance between the first and second principal component. And we can sort of see visually here what's going on. We see a majority of this variance is from left to right in that dimension 1 plane, and we see it right on the line of short route rate, if you guys can read that, and then deep route rate. And this is sort of what we'd expect. And we can see some of these players that verge off have a little bit more nuanced production. Whereas, these deep route guys over here are, the deep threats that we're used to seeing. And then over here, we've got a whole bunch of running backs and a couple tight ends mixed in there. And so even though we see that this, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but even though that this first principal component is explaining much of the variance and there's quite the drop off to dimension 2, when we get to the k-means, we are going to opt for a higher number of k for the sake of the assignment and understanding these nuanced roles. Even though, as we see down here, and here it is again, the cumulative variance percent is the cumulative variance explained by each successive principal component. So we see that it tapers off here, and we'll see this a little bit easier in this plot. But even though we're looking here to find the optimal number of k, given the explained variance and principal component complexity, model complexity, even though we're trying to optimize that trade-off for the sake of the assignment and understanding some of these nuanced roles that we have, I'm going to opt for a higher number of k equals 4 rather than k equals 2. But in terms of variance explained, this looks very good. We have a lot of variance explained in that first dimension, but we see there's still a little bit of nuance that can be explored by those additional principal components. And that's sort of what we'll get into down here. Again, so optimal number of k is k equals 2, but this analysis is not life or death here. I'm not reporting to stakeholders who are making billion-dollar decisions. So again, I'm just opting for a higher number of k for the sake of the assignment and having fun here. So we're going to skip this where I ran the clustering with k equals 2 because, like I had mentioned, that just really picks up on the difference between the short route rate and the deep route rate. So a lot of running backs versus deep wide receivers, and they sort of just draw a line down the middle and say, these are the short guys, these are the deep guys, but we want to get into that more nuanced level of production. And so we're going to go down here and we're going to do our model with k equals 4. And so here we're running the k-means on our principal components analysis data. And we see a lot of these players that we know getting grouped here. And we'll see in a second what these groups mean and what the clustering model is picking up on in terms of the predictors that we had mentioned. Let's make this a little bit bigger. There we go. So starting with cluster 1, we see moderate catch rate, um, more short routes than deep routes. The deep route rate is pretty low, which follows the short route rate is the opposite of that. Not too many touchdowns. Average yards after catch and yards per catch are again pretty moderate. So I'd say cluster 1 seems to be characterized by a moderate to above average catch rate and short routes, and their production is middle of the pack. Moving on to cluster 2, we see this is the peak of catch rate, high percentile players in terms of catch rate, which follows that short route rate is also very high because those are just easier balls to catch. Not too many touchdowns, but the yards after catch is quite high, and yards per catch is quite low. So cluster 2 seems to be characterized by high catch rate and high yak, yards after catch. Cluster 3, we see the catch rate is quite poor, but as we might expect, they're running the most deep routes here. So cluster 3 is characterized by high deep route rate. Not too many touchdowns and not too much yak, but the yards per catch is quite high. So cluster 3, as we can see, is characterized by high deep route rate and high yards per catch. And a lot of these are correlated with each other, so it makes sense to see some of these grouped in the same cluster. And then on to cluster 4, we see about average catch rate, deep route rate and short route rate are honestly like right in the middle. So these players are running they're running a full route tree, a complete route tree. They're running deep routes and they're running short routes. The touchdown production is quite high in cluster 4. So these are your players who are scoring. The yak is moderate and the yards per catch is above average. So taking all that I just said, we are now going to look at how I named or essentially created these receiver role archetypes. And so what we do here is I'm just taking our gathered data from above and I'm filtering. So I'm just looking at the players from cluster 1, cluster 2, 3, 4. And so this is cluster 1 players, which I categorized as slot receivers and safety valves due to the above average catch rate and short route rate. These players are players who work primarily in the short to intermediate range, typically out of slants or curls or mesh concepts, and these tend to be tight ends or slot wide receivers. And we can see a lot of guys who we recognize, Travis Kelce being the first name on there. For the safety valve cluster is pretty funny considering that is his bread and butter, just getting open, finding places in the open field where Mahomes can dump it off to him. Second cluster, where we had the high catch rate and high yak, these seems to be a lot of running backs, almost exclusively running backs, with a couple tight ends mixed in there. Cluster 3, which we characterized by the high deep route rate and high yards per catch, these are bona fide deep threats. George Pickens, Drake London, DK Metcalf, guys who you throw the ball deep and you know they're going to go and get it. And then cluster 4, which we sort of identified as the high producing versatile wide receivers. These are the versatile X wide receivers. So your typical wide receiver ones. We've got Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra. But yeah,